educating,
I think educational television is a good idea because it teaches children what's going on for the future.
informing,
I'm very proud to be here, the homecoming day of the University of Vermont.
entertaining,
Quite a few people have asked me how good of a business I have raising wolf hybrids. It's more of a non-profitable hobby than a business.
inspiring,
This is a very important thing to teach, and hopefully it will show them the alternative to most modern lifestyles.
For 50 years, Vermont PBS has been here. Part of your lives, part of the community, sharing your stories, providing a platform for dialogue, and a window to our world. Vermont PBS, celebrating 50 years in 2017.
Hi, I'm Fran Stoddard, your host for this Vermont PBS 50th Anniversary Special. I'm here in the Vermont PBS studio, in the same place it all started with the inaugural broadcast as Vermont Educational Television on October 16th, 1967. This year we'll be celebrating 50 years of public broadcasting in Vermont, 50 years of sharing stories about Vermonters and their communities, and of course, fabulous PBS content. 50 years embracing our mission to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire. In this program, we'll be looking back at the station's earliest years through the lens of the recent transfers of archival 16mm film. Yes, film, not tape, and certainly not digital files. The clips you are about to see are decades old and haven't been seen in years. These films not only remind us of what used to be on television, but give us a glimpse of what Vermont looked like in the 60s and 70s as well. I'll be joined by special guests from our past, folks that you may remember. We'll watch the films together and share some special stories and memories from the past. Barge Canal Market in Burlington helped put us in the mood with this set. Before we get watching these classic clips, I'd like to welcome our first guest. Ann Curran started working at Vermont PBS as a volunteer for the first auction in May of 1975. Her talents were quickly recognized, and she was offered a position that developed into a career in promotion and communications at the station until her retirement 38 years later in 2013. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you, Fran.
It's so great having
Good
you
to
here.
be here.
Love this set, huh?
The vintage look.
So, what job did you not have here at public television?
Oh, yeah, I did work mostly in communications, but I would have to say they never let me touch any buttons in master control.
Okay, you stayed out of there, or in the background?
Yeah,
For
they
there.
just said, watch out.
So, something else that you were clearly very involved with were name changes, and there were quite a few here. About how many do you think you
Well, let's
went
see, I
through?
started working for Vermont Educational Television, which
Right.
pretty soon was shortened to Vermont ETV or just ETV.
Right.
And then there was the era of Vermont Public Television, shortened to VPT, and then
Right,
eventually Vermont PBS.
What was a highlight here? I mean, you really did everything. You did some production and certainly all your communications work, but what was a highlight working here at PBS?
Well, always I enjoyed the most working on promoting our local programs. And we had many of them, and many of them just had such a great reaction from viewers that it made me proud to be working with our production staff and getting the word out about those. I guess my favorite would have to be one sort of later in my career here when I got to work on production for birding in Vermont, which was a labor of love for me in addition to my day job.
Right, and you got to go out on remote locations.
I did. I got to hold a Bicknell's thrush in my hand. Yeah, this is a big deal for a birder.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to the archives because I'm sure some people want to see what we've got. We've got plenty to look at, and these were days before your time. We're going back 50 years into October of 1967. It was a daytime broadcast that was really for schools, and it was called ITV, or Instructional Television, which was, but it was always educational television, I guess, as well.
That would be the
right?
overall name of the station and then of the network. And then ITV was a core service, instructional television for the schools of Vermont.
And actually, during that time, what else was different about it? you didn't broadcast 24 hours a day.
No, you sent tapes to schools, of course. You didn't have a transmission system for that. But certainly in the evening hours, after school hours, we did have a service, a general service with public affairs, with cultural programs for adults at home. We just had a more limited day. Gradually over the years, we added hours to the day, and it was a big deal when we went to a 24-hour service.
Right.
I can remember that.
Sure. Well, let's watch as then Governor Phil Hoff dedicates the station with the University of Vermont President Lyman Smith Rowell about 7 months into the maiden broadcast.
Lyman, I can't tell you how delighted I am here to be with you this afternoon, and also to express this. It seems to me that educational television here in Vermont is off to an awfully good start. And yet I can't help but feel that it's simply a harbinger of better things to come. I have here with me a proclamation which, with your indulgence, I will read. Whereas a quality education is a right of every Vermonter, and whereas the realization of every citizen's full educational potential is essential to the future growth and development of our state and country, and whereas the initiative and leadership of the University of Vermont has resulted in the establishment of an ETV network serving the state, now therefore I, Philip H. Hoff, Governor of the State of Vermont, do sign this testimonial commending the university for its efforts on behalf of the citizens of Vermont through its official role in this major contribution to the advancement of education. Given under my hand and great seal of the State of Vermont at Montpelier, this 30th day of April, 1968, and Lyman, that's my signature.
Phil, it's a very great pleasure to be able to do this afternoon. And more formally, I would say that in behalf of the trustees of the University of Vermont and all of us at the University of Vermont, we appreciate very much the efforts that you have put in as governor of the state, and we hope that we can live up to the expectation by providing for the people of the state of Vermont, from the youngest to the oldest, educational opportunities through this wonderful new facility.
I know you will.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Lyman.
This indeed was a revolution. We still have this proclamation. It was wonderful. Mary, our archivist, was so excited to get this. And indeed, there is Phil Hoff's signature right there. And as part of this, I mean, there were in-school broadcast schedules given to the school. You just said that schools would receive tapes.
Yes, we would have things available on, I guess, 3/4-inch tapes at the first, the first version. And if schools wanted to see something that wasn't in our broadcast schedule, we would make that available to them, and they could, you know, we could ship them tapes, and they would use them and ship them back. So, yeah, it was low tech but very effective.
Well, and what a change for, you know, it really modernized Vermont. There was another thing that I read that with modernization of the Vermont schools came central heating, libraries, and educational television. Yeah. So we're going to take another look at an ITV, the instructional part, another broadcast that would have shown how it worked in the schools.
Educational TV is another way of learning besides books.
I think educational television is a good idea because it teaches children what's going on for the future.
I like the science program because it has samples and pictures that you couldn't get otherwise.
Educational television is one of the few channels that teaches.
Bobby, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And you push this button and you turn this on, and boom, there's education in our schools.
Those kids were pretty smart.
Yeah, they were.
I'd love to know where they are now.
I know. These are some beautiful schools here. I guess, yeah. You know, part of this is putting the antennas up on every single school. Yeah, there's a small school. I think that's Rice. And another beautiful school building. So it seems that, you know, Vermont PBS has always supported teachers and education along the way. I wondered if was there ever a juggle between educational and cultural programming, or what? We do both here.
I think education has always been at the heart of the mission of Vermont PBS. There was a period of time where, well, maybe educational television sounded a little too serious and a little too restricted. So that was why a lot of stations nationally began calling themselves public television to really acknowledge the wider mission and the wider audience. Right. But the heart of the educational mission never went away, and it's lifelong learning for everybody.
Right. Well, we have one more educational piece that we'd like to look at. Vermont School Report was the second show ever broadcast on this station and the first of a series. Our archivist has chosen an episode 5 years into the series from 1972 featuring Shelburne Middle School and their partnership with Shelburne Craft School for the art curriculum.
I think our basic concept of teaching art here at the Shelburne Middle School is to get our kids totally turned on by their own environment so that they can take this and use it to make good art. In our graphics area, Marcia Marshall, our teacher's aide, is helping 8th grade students explore the possibilities of silk screening.
Oh, good, better color, very good.
We've tried to create a very home-like, warm atmosphere in our vegetable dyeing, spinning, and weaving area.
Yep, you're doing okay.
Our students seem to enjoy experimenting with light and stained glass. It allows them to work with the transparencies of color found only in nature.
That's really flowing good.
Both of these girls are working by themselves in a workshop situation. Any student that wishes to join them may, and they in turn would teach the class. This is a thing we work for in all of our areas, students teaching other students, so that we can break down the teacher-student barrier. I think we all learn from one another.
What's old is new again. Crafts are coming back. Yeah. Some of these, even the values of education and what they're trying to show there, right back here. This is pretty amazing to see this program guide that I'm sure you had something to do with. I had never seen this bound version, so tell us a little bit about this program guide that went out to households and schools.
Right, monthly program guide went out to people who were members of Vermont PBS, who were contributors, and we also had a separate instructional TV guide that was produced yearly, and then schools also got various bulletins of, updates on things but there was the ITV guide, and there was the monthly program guide, and for many years I was the editor of that, and with some wonderful staff colleagues put that out.
And then yearly, the university would kind of demand having this bound. They would bind them.
We were part of the university in the period of time when we did annual bound volumes, and they required a copy to be sent to the university library because it was a university publication. And now we're really glad we did that, because we have these archives right there for us.
Exactly. Right. It's fantastic. So I want to move on to production now, and joining us is someone who worked here for 20 years in production and station management. Dan Harvey came to Vermont ETV as a work-study student while studying mass communications at UVM, and then landed a production technician position at Vermont ETV right out of school in 1985. His promotions came steadily and quickly until he became general manager of the station, a position he held for 6 years. Then he has since returned to UVM to a series of impressive positions. He is currently assistant dean of the Graduate College and director of operations for the Office of the Vice President for Research at the university. It's great to get him back to his old stomping ground. Welcome so much,
Dan. Great to be here. Thank you very much.
Hi, Dan.
How are you?
Nice to see you again.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So, you not only kind of produced and directed probably hundreds of shows here, you often had to find the funds even to create them, and you have numerous awards to show for it. A highlight, we'll get to a couple of them, but what pops to mind?
Well, to me, the thing that really helped turned the tide for us with local production was funding from the USDA Rural Development. That was some funding that came to us. It was pretty substantial, and through that we funded many, many programs. My favorite, probably Outdoor Journal.
Sure, which went on for years.
Yes, still going on. That program was really made possible because of the hard work of Neil Hilt, who produced and directed and shot and edited, along with Lawrence Pine and many other production people, of course. But the programming that was made possible by the USDA really was my favorite.
Which you helped bring in and then make those things. So I wanted to start off with some very early remote and studio clips. These don't have audio, but they speak to the breadth of programming offered early on. So let's go back in time and we can just chat over them. And here there's the truck.
Yes, the Walrus, it was called.
Because it was just so huge?
You'll see it again, yeah.
It had to be to get all those people and those giant cameras in there.
Yeah, look at the camera. The size of the cameras are extraordinary. And that you lugged those around. And here we are at the All-State Music Festival and Parade in Burlington.
Yeah. Notice that the cameras don't have, those do have wheels.
It has wheels?
Many times they were just on tripods that couldn't move, but that one
and a cable
moves,
that needed to go to the truck.
Absolutely, yeah.
And all these people
There's
are
some high stepping over the cable there.
It's important to mention that over the years, the ability of the engineering staff at Vermont ETV to just take on the challenge of local production statewide. Just imagine that they actually pulled these cameras out into the street. Those are full-blown, typically studio cameras.
And here's Main Street, Burlington. I can recognize a couple of things here.
Yep.
Somebody mentioned the Strong Theater. There we go. That's no longer around. Wow. And this is a remarkable clip from 1967. It was the first special called The Odyssey of a Tree. That's about a tree that goes to the White House for Christmas.
Yeah, and most likely was shot with one of their first field cameras. Obviously, they weren't going to bring a studio camera out into a snowy field in Rochester, Vermont, I think it was. Might have been Ron Clark shooting that footage, I'm not sure, or perhaps Chuck Roberts.
And this is in Rochester, Vermont. They got this tree, and it's the only one that's ever come from Vermont, I was told.
Yeah, so far.
So far, exactly.
Lee
and they
Phillips
took
was the name of our film photographer back then. I think he was the original one. We've got photos of him in the archives.
So here we are back in the studio. That's probably Studio A, the large studio that we're sitting in right now. And you can see they brought the cameras back in from Church Street and set them back up in the studio.
There were a lot of programs, if I look at archival photos, still photos, where we brought school children in, whether to sing for a Christmas special or for various kinds of shows where they'd be lined up and it would be a local instructional TV show.
Yeah.
Nice dolly too over to here. And I know that the archivist is just starting to get into some of these archives, and so we don't have some of the audio, but we're looking for the audio too, and we might be able to join that up with this wonderful footage, but we couldn't help but to take a peek at this.
Yep. It exists, and that's why in the old days they had the clapper. That was how the editor was able to sync up the sound in the video. And there is a field camera. It looks like they're shooting a spot for the auction.
Yeah,
storyboard. Their storyboard there, yeah. And we think that's Mary Segrist Jones on the left. Miking up the talent. Some things never change.
Okay, bid high, bid often.
That's right. Make your first bid your best bid.
So Dan, what are we seeing here?
Well, we're back in the studio, and
Hoff.
That was Phil Hoff. With the ubiquitous cigarette back in the day. Nobody seemed to mind. And then I think eventually we're going to switch to Governor Salmon.
Right.
I believe. Switch it to right here.
Later.
Yeah. And what I love about this clip is that we're going to see Jack Barry, one of my favorite people in the history of Vermont ETV Incorporated. He's one of the reporters on the right.
Yeah, I think he's coming up in a minute. And this is part of also a series
right
called...
there, Jack
Here's a nice
Berry.
close-up
There
of
he
Jack.
is. So he was such an icon in Vermont broadcasting.
Jack Berry was the dean of Vermont broadcasters. He would do a radio show in the morning and then come to Vermont ETV and read up his newspapers and get ready and then do one of, could have been a multitude of programming in the afternoon, Vermont This Week, Vermont Report, hosting a special. He hosted the auction.
Fundraisers galore.
Fundraisers, yep.
He would stand up and just talk for 20 minutes if he had to.
He was a producer's dream. He could just talk and talk and talk.
Jack
He
Berry.
was a treasure, a state treasure.
And cigarettes. That just blows my mind.
Yeah.
But it was done.
It was-
I've
it's
seen
just-
it.
that's-
Bad for people, bad for the
it's
equipment,
just- but nobody knew any differently.
One of our wonderful engineers, Wayne Rosberg, had the office next to mine, and every now and then he'd have someone in and they'd light up cigars.
Yeah.
And I would think, oh my gosh, open the windows.
Yeah, well, those were the days.
But pretty soon those little penguin
Yep,
signs went up
exactly.
everywhere
Yep,
around.
yep. Everything changed. The equipment got smaller and even more mobile than it was, and we just continued to do public affairs programming more and more. And I think it was great that at the time we brought people here to the studio, but we eventually became very good at getting out into the field. The Walrus was retired at some point, but in the mid to late 90s, we got funding from the USDA to build a new remote truck, and we were in Montpelier all the time. And to sort of tie in with the programming for students, one of the most favorite remote broadcasts we ever did was a live program from the State House where our good buddy Rob Mahalik took school children on an entire tour of the State House.
Oh,
it was
that's so
really
precious.
fun.
Great.
Do you remember that?
I loved that show. I learned so much about the State House at the time. It was just a treasure, that program.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to go on for more public affairs programming because Vermont PBS has always and continues to do amazing public affairs programming from the beginning to present day. So we're going to pop back to the early 70s to an opening of the Vermont Senate. Also, an interesting listen on some of the familiar Vermont values that we all still hold, and a visit by President Richard Nixon.
Pursuant to the Constitution of the State of Vermont, I hereby open the 1973 session of the Senate and call the Senate to order. Will all the senators rise and receive the oath of office from the Secretary of the Senate? Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I want you to know that in looking amongst you, I see the elements for one of the finest senates that's ever sat in this chamber.
I hope that Governor Salmon will carry out his campaign pledge to stop the land development in Vermont or hold it down as much as possible. At the same time, I hope he will not run the state into debt. I don't want to see it in the condition it was in 4 years ago.
I voted for Tom Salmon basically on the environmental issue.
The problem of elder state residents coming in and mostly speculators and buying up property, buying up abandoned farms, splitting them up into small lots and getting large prices for them.
My property tax last year was $503, and now they have raised it to $913. And I lost my husband July 1st, and I just can't pay it.
I would like to see something as regards to his proposals on taxing the out-of-stater and keeping the in-state taxes as they are or less. So I think taxes probably, along with good development, are very important. I still don't want to see development stopped.
I would not like to see what is happening in New Hampshire, which includes pink elephants, huge Paul Bunyan's standing in the middle of the road, distracting the eye, motels and hotels wherever you go.
I hope that Governor Salmon will do something about a recycling program for the state.
The biggest thing that I'd like to see Governor Salmon do during his tenure in office would encourage as much as possible the construction of low-cost housing in Vermont.
I think that the new governor should implement a hot lunch program throughout the entire state at all levels in public education, as well as making the implementation of this program community-based, having more community-based operations and local control.
I think that Governor-elect Salmon should increase funding for child care centers in Vermont so that mothers who are presently on welfare and are unable to work will be able to have adequate and good care for their children so that they will be able to work.
I feel there should be stricter controls on welfare recipients. I think it might make for a better Vermont and a better feeling all around.
I'd really like to see Governor-elect Salmon appoint a woman as Commissioner of Social Welfare. I think this would increase the number of women in high-level positions in state government, and I also think it would be very appropriate in this particular department because most adult welfare clients are women.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
I'm very proud to be here on a special day, which is non-political in one respect, certainly, the homecoming day of the University of Vermont. Thank you. And I also want to say that, speaking of the university, let's pay our respects to the Rice Memorial Band over here. How about that? And to the Canadian geese in the back. The Vermont turkeys are going to go up to Canada on an exchange visit for the Canadian geese next week. But there is a more fundamental reason in this year, 1970, that I am very happy to be here to open this campaign in Vermont. It has to do with the fact that I have enormous respect for the men who are candidates on your ticket here this year. Bob Stafford, who has been formerly your governor, a man who came to the Congress in the 87th Congress, and all of the congressmen in the country who were elected that year elected him as their leader. That's an indication of what do they think of Vermont and Bob Stafford in Washington, D.C. I have had the opportunity to meet all the governors of the 50 states at various governors' conferences, and I respect them all, but there are some who stand out, and one who stands out is your governor because he has courage, the courage to do what is right for his state, to take a mess fiscally and clean it up in the state of Vermont. I hear some of the young people here say, stop the war, and I heard it said outside. I understand that. Let me tell you what we found, and then you judge the record. When we came into office, we found 550,000 Americans in Vietnam. There was no plan to bring them home. There was no plan to end the war. There was no peace plan that had been submitted.
Remarkable footage, and we've seen kind of some of this with the Vietnam special just recently. You know, I was so interested in the middle, we had this show called Cracker Barrel on Main, which is a very popular format. I remember doing some of it for the Free Press, where you would ask people's opinion on the street, man on the street, opinions. What was remarkable to me is how the values really haven't changed that much.
So much diversity of thought, but so many of these issues are issues today, of course. And there was also a studio show, Vermont Cracker Barrel, because I remember the set actually had a big Cracker Barrel on it in the center, and depending on the topic, you know, there was a host and people sitting around talking about a wide variety of things.
Right.
So we've always looked at bringing in people's opinion, bringing in people with a diversity of thoughts about timely topics.
Telling that Nixon said, you know, your people are in there all the time, as I think continue to be true right throughout, that little Vermont has had its say in Washington.
Yep.
No, Vermont PBS does not shy away from debate. Next up, we have a piece of fascinating documentary on the Windsor prison that is just being shut down right now, this month. And that will be followed by some lively debates and a protest rally at the University of Vermont.
This institution is, of course, the oldest in the country, and when it was built, undoubtedly was modern for those days. It was an improvement over what had transpired prior to that. But we now find ourselves in an entirely different situation. I find that we are handicapped in helping people by the very lack of physical facilities. For instance, the very size of our cells, the very lack of privacy that is presented by a general cell block such as we are using, lack of some facilities for sanitation of individuals, personal sanitation, all tend to downgrade human dignity, which we should be upgrading and preserving as much as possible. I want to say that we have some very dedicated staff people here who run as relaxed a program as possible to keep tensions down, which is only proper. Secondly, we have to improvise as far as space is concerned. We make do, and it's the best we can with what we have.
So I favor for Vermont a reasonably carefully drawn law liberalizing our antiquated abortion law and providing for abortion under proper hospital provisions and safeguards.
You mentioned the fact that abortion goes back to the time of the ancient Egyptians and Romans. Well, if I remember my history correctly, so do pagan sacrifices. And would you have this idea that because it goes back in time, because it is rooted in our history, we should continue this act, if you will?
No, you're right. And I wouldn't argue that anything went on in those days would be good for us today. I was simply making the point to indicate that abortion procedure, often very crude and dangerous, has been known since early days, and it has been practiced from that time to this, and I don't think you can do anything to stop it now. That was the point I was making.
All of us desire to help the disabled, the blind, the aged, and the disadvantaged, no matter who they are. But the laws we have passed to do this have become so broad and so all-encompassing and so detailed that more and more people rightfully come to feel that they too should come under the welfare umbrella. These laws can only end in the weakening of our system. I do not believe that we can tolerate a system which, under working people, can be made to feel like fools by those who will not work and desire to continue to draw welfare benefits.
Now, it seems a little difficult for me to conceive of requiring a welfare recipient to work or sign up for employment when in fact there's no employment available. We have an implication in the bill that says people are unwilling to work, don't want to work. If jobs are made available to them, they won't take them. I don't think that's the case. I think in fact we're finding that jobs are not available for people to take.
On to UVM.
That's Billings Hall, I believe, the main entrance to Billings.
Great, yeah.
And that's got to be the UVM green.
And this was in 1970 again. This was when Nixon came, same year that he was here. And I think that there were also some protests that were happening at the airport. And yeah, they actually said it was a beautiful day in the write-up. There was actually a write-up in the newspaper.
Yeah,
and
that's Morrill Hall in the back.
It went on all day. There were films and speeches. They had a major speaker from the Black Panthers. I think we'll see some of that group here. So iconic during this day. Well, a remarkable thing you did during your tenure was the civil unions hearings. So what pops into your mind about that amazingly historic time?
Well, we'd been watching it, and Joe Marone. Joe was the a senior producer at the time, and I remember him coming to me as the production manager saying, we need to drop everything and we need to do this tomorrow. And so we had a quick production meeting and engineering meeting and marketing and communications meeting, and it was one of those all hands on deck situations. Everyone was nervous because the topic was, it was relatively new to people. And, you know, you look back on it now, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it was at the time. The legislature was very divided. I believe it was the House Judicial Committee was in charge of it originally. Little, I think, was the...
Right, Tom Little?
Tom Little was the chair, and he was great. He was, I'd say, courageous in his efforts to bring the discussion to the public, and it passed, I believe, barely, as I recall. But we were very proud of that. It was exhilarating and nerve-wracking all at the same time, but it's what we do. It's what we did. From day one, you saw it with the Walrus and cameras in the streets. You figure out what's important to the people of Vermont, and you go show it to them.
And even that Windsor Prison documentary, that's really about an art program in the prison, but it's talking about, you know, we really need to move on and probably shut this down. Well, 48 years later, they're just shutting that down. So to get to all this great programming, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and Vermont PBS has always been a leader in technical innovations. And so we'll run this clip, and Dan, maybe you can walk us through, or Ann also, with what you're seeing about the technology behind television. Mount Mansfield, the towers.
So when Vermont TV Inc. came on the air, eventually there were 4 transmitters. Help me out, Ann. Mansfield was our main one, right? Burke Mountain,
Castleton,
Ascutney, Grandpa Knob, actually, right, in Castleton, which was really just a few miles from where I grew up.
And several low-powered translators in the south of the state. But this is interesting when you see the guys on the snowmobiles, because in the early days, before some automation was developed, when we were on the air, there needed to be a person at each transmitter to do the switching and to run the technical equipment. And of course, in the winter, you had to get there by snowshoes, snow machine, and it later became, you know, the snow cats and some of those, and they still use them at the transmitters, but they don't have to camp and stay there for like 3 or 4 day shifts at a time.
And you mentioned innovation. Wayne Rosberg and Ronnie Whitcomb, I believe, and their team were the first in the country to really have a fully automated remote transmitter site.
And we should say Ron, I believe, was the person who flipped the switch to put this Burlington channel on the air on October 16th, 1967.
And now we're back in the studio. There's the cameras again.
And we saw the artist, and I think this is Così fan tutti.
Oh, why not?
They're broadcasting in the studio.
I'm looking for some familiar faces.
Well, we're going back. There's beautiful sculptures in the back.
So here the engineering crew is putting together a satellite dish. And you can see, I hope you can tell how big that is. It's huge.
It's mammoth.
Took a couple cranes to put it together.
And still in the backyard of the Vermont PBS headquarters, I believe.
I don't believe they use it anymore, but for a long time it was the link from the Colchester studio to start basically streaming programming. And why don't you talk about the bicycle days, the bicycle tape
that was a big innovation, because in the early days, if you were airing a national program, a lot of it, I mean, there was some transmission over various steps of lines, but there was also a good bit of sending tapes from whoever was producing something to the station that was airing it. By mail, by courier, and they called it bicycling. And it was a huge, huge step forward when local stations got dishes like these on their site to have the programming from PBS sent over the air directly to them and not have to worry about, am I going to get my tape on time? Is there going to be an interruption in service? So it was a great help for the viewer as well.
So this really changed what you were able to do.
It was the interconnect.
We're seeing some people here. Wally Edwards I saw, and Brian Marshall.
Head of engineering
Yeah.
for a long time, our original.
Kip Campbell, perhaps, that I see, and it's probably Ron Clark shooting this film. Again, it's
Right.
film.
Yeah.
Probably audio somewhere. So.
And then another sea change for Vermont PBS, of course, was the conversion to digital, which was huge for the two of you. You were both there then when that happened. And Vermont PBS really took a lead role in this. And Anne, you had to help the public understand what this change meant, what they had to do, how to move forward.
It was a huge change, and one thing that worked in this market, which is the commercial stations had their transmitters co-located on Mount Mansfield with us. So the stations were used to working together in many, many ways, but it was a group of rivals as well. But we did manage to pull together a wonderful project that included all of the local stations because we were all mandated to go digital, and we realized we needed to educate the public, so we did a lot in every way we could think of, including right up to the actual time that the switch was pulled to put analog off, and we had a big like boiler room right here in the studio with long tables, engineers ready to jump in and handle hard questions, and phone numbers so that people could call in when they hadn't been prepared or they thought they were prepared, and what do I do now?
Right.
It was impressive. I have the feeling it went on for a month. It might have only been a week or 10 days, but staff from all the local stations came in and helped out.
Well, I'd like to move on to arts and culture, of course, another big part of Vermont PBS. They reflect who we are as Vermonters, and archivist Mary Albee has chosen some really choice footage for us to savor. So let's watch to see what's changed and what hasn't. So this is Trapp Family Lodge,
Okay, right.
and I believe this was the first cross-country ski resort. People weren't doing cross-country skiing.
We would go
so
up
much
there in
then.
1970. They were trying so hard to promote it that it was free. That's how long ago that was. But then they had a wonderful shop where they sold equipment and wax. Remember all the different gooey kinds of wax you'd had to put on your cross-country skis
I think that's
back
Maria.
then. That's Maria
Von
Trapp. Yeah.
Sound of Music.
Polling right along there.
Right. I remember seeing her at the Burlington Airport. It was so exciting. Well, this hasn't really, the sport
Some
hasn't
pretty good
changed all
skiers
that
there.
much.
And we did do a how-to program somewhere in the maybe late 70s, early 80s on cross-country skiing, which was
great. How to do it? Well,
how to do it.
Must have helped.
Yeah.
Oh, and here we're on to Maple. And I think what's interesting about this, it's almost, what are the new modern ways of doing this?
Having a drill with a little generator on
A little
his
generator on
back.
your back.
Oh, is that what that is?
So kind of, the modern and the traditional. Oh, and here's tubing. That was
This is
that was
early
pretty
on
new
tubing, yeah.
during that time.
Raw
This is
sap.
actually 1968.
Yum.
Or I'm just checking my notes here. It's 1968.
And all the snow's gone from when they shot the footage of the tapping going on.
Yeah. Amazing to really see. A lot of people would never have seen how this all worked, except for television. Really taking us into a certain lifestyle,
This is
way of being in Vermont.
classic documentary style.
Yep.
There was a producer and a sound man and a videographer, and just shoot, and come back and put it all together.
Oh, and Dakin Farms.
Yeah, right on Route 7.
And they had cross-country trails back then as well.
Oh, no
They
kidding.
were promoting the
Oh my
sport.
gosh, the store looks exactly the same. The quality of the film is really quite extraordinary.
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Orvis.
this,
This
the
has gotta be
Lumberjack
Orvis.
Roundup. This does still go on.
In the Northeast Kingdom
So
area,
impressive.
do we think?
Wow, that was quick.
So they're, oh yeah, so they're competing against the clock for.
Right.
Wow.
I like the cutaways to the audience too.
Yeah.
That just seems a little dangerous, doesn't it?
Makes
Swing
you
it
kind of
back
cringe.
as hard as you can, right between your feet.
Cringe.
Oh, and they don't. I guess that's why the chains are there
Yeah.
to hold them up. Wow, it's very impressive.
I don't know if anyone else notices, but I love the microphones in all this old
Looks
footage.
like an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
I looked at it and thought, what's that guy doing? Oh, it's this microphone.
Wow.
How fast can
Wow.
you chop a tree down? Wow.
So these are just some of the gems. There's so much amazing footage that we have, these treasures. And I believe that this is Christmas time.
Oh.
Christmas in Vermont. 1971, I think some of this is Church Street when they still
sure.
allowed cars going up and down the street.
Yeah.
And the patient husband holding the
Right.
packages. Going to church. Some lovely scenics. This is another thing that Vermont PBS does so well. Yeah, in black and white, which works in winter.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Sleigh. How classic is that?
Mm-hmm.
I love this point of view.
That was a Ron Clark
Right?
special. Ron
Okay. That's
always
nice.
did a point of view. No matter what the vehicle was.
And
he
they're
was-
doing this is beautiful work.
Yay.
Shortly before the digital transition, having the fun of going up to top of Mount Mansfield for some publicity photos and going up on the crane in a basket with Ron Whitcomb, our chief engineer, Ron Clark, our photographer, and another wonderful engineer, Rich Dana, and thinking, what have I done? Because it's high enough on the top of Mount Mansfield, but then you're many, many feet above, and our chief engineer would, make the sign to the crane operator, okay, take us up farther, take us down. And then Ron needed to get those shots, and he was kind of moving the basket. And when Rich said, I think we should be maybe going down now, I thought, okay, we're really in trouble now, because this guy was such a wonderfully practical, level-headed, and an EMT, which was
Yes,
good, because
always
I
helpful.
thought if we're in really big trouble, maybe Rich will save our lives.
I'll move on to a classic show that we had going for years. Crossroads was a magazine-style show about Vermont and Vermonters that began in 1981 and continued as a series for 13 years. We're going to start with a clip from the very first program and hand-pick a couple of other outtakes from the hundreds of precious stories that we've got.
Here's the Bundy.
Right. I remember it, I can't see it.
Retinitis pigmentosa is an hereditary eye disease that has stricken almost 200,000 Americans, causing their field of vision to slowly narrow and leading ultimately to blindness. Andy Potok, who lives here in this house in Plainfield, Vermont, is an RP victim who has not yet lost all of his sight. Still, for the past 10 years, Andy has been unable to continue the work that was his life's passion. For until his sight began to dramatically decrease, Andy Potok was an artist.
In 1965, the Orvis company was primarily a rod manufacturer and fishing tackle company, selling about 65% through dealers and 35% through the catalog. We announced the first Orvis fly fishing school, which was successful far beyond our expectation.
You don't want any further back than 1 o'clock.
Right. For any reason.
How is that, better?
That's the best one so far. I'm going to pull it down just with a little bit more force. Now, there you go, that's perfect.
I've had the opportunity to fish most of the famous rivers throughout the world. One of the my greatest pleasures is right here in Vermont, though, on the Battenkill River. If I had one more day to fish and could choose my river, it would be the Battenkill River here in Manchester, Vermont.
The type of business that we had in the New York City area demanded a certain level of expertise. We simply could not find mechanics competent in these areas, and the ability to train people on the job is extremely difficult. We needed a formal, disciplined area to train these people. And in investigating our own industry, we found no such school existed. So the idea was born, let's start our own school. This is the sheet we're going to use for phase 2, right, Steve?
Yes.
Okay, do we have this sheet oriented in the right direction?
We're going to match this.
Paper hangers have many opportunities to be creative. Very often they are asked by their clients what type of pattern and what type of color would you suggest for this room. So it behooves a professional to know a little something about proportion, scale, history of pattern, not only on a wall covering, but how it affects the individual.
When this course finishes, I hope to go back to Philadelphia and get a few jobs. I already have my name distributed among a few people, and I have a few jobs set up. But I'd like to make a lot more money and go back and be a professional paper hanger.
Every time we survey a class, and those surveys forms come back in, and they say, thank you, Mr. Warshaw, for helping shape my life, for giving me purpose and direction. I can't express to you the sensation that comes over the instructor, being so instrumental in the formation of a person. We've given these individuals a way to earn a living, and the anecdote that comes to mind is an old Chinese proverb. If you teach a man a fish, he'll eat that day, and he'll eat for the rest of his life. But if you just give him a fish, he's only going to eat that one day.
When you've been raising wolf hybrids as long as I have, you're bound to have a few funny things happen. A friend of mine had one of my dogs that would go from his home, which is a short ways out of the village, down to the local Grand Union, step on the automatic door, walk into the store and go down the aisle to the meat counter, stand up on its hind legs and carefully select a choice cut of meat, and after it made its selection, it would take the meat and walk back down the aisle back to the automatic door and walk back out, while all the store clerks and managers stood there kind of shocked.
Tremendous, 350 cars this year, and it's been growing every year. It's a lot of fun, and the people are very friendly. The antique cars, everybody has something to talk about. Everybody has something to do with it indirectly or directly.
This particular car and I, we won first prize the first 2 years, best original condition, 57, 58. And then we kind of declared a summer solstice and didn't come for a long while. I'm just starting to come back. But it's a working everyday car, other than wintertime. I let somebody else run over the ditch and off the precipices in the wintertime. I'll stay home and watch educational TV.
In the judging of a classic car, primarily we are looking to, one, check the machine to make sure that it is roadable. So we request the owner to start the engine to allow it to idle for a while. We're looking at the condition of the engine room, whether oil is dripping from various components. While we're doing that, we're checking other mechanical things, the lights, the windshield wipers, that type of thing.
Good.
That was Enzo DeMaio in the back of the car.
Very appropriate to see Enzo in that last shot waving. He and Jeremy Segrist Jones produced Crossroads, I believe, from day one. Enzo was the on-air host and producer, and that was right around when I showed up. So I got to edit many of the segments, the roll-ins, and then eventually would put the show together with Larry Evans and Scott Esmond or whoever might be running audio. And that show ran for a long time until it ended at some point, but then Points North came along.
Points North?
RFD,
Yep.
Out and About,
Yeah,
these
Outdoor
magazine-style shows. If there's an interesting little story you may not have heard of in Vermont, Vermont PBS found it and put it
True
into
enough.
and I enjoyed promoting those so much and watching them
and
so
even
much.
This, I think it was the 60th anniversary of the Stowe Antique Car Show.
Right.
This year, which was pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, what a journey we've had. Dan Harvey and Curran, thank you so much for being wonderful guests. It's just been a privilege to sit here with you and enjoy some of this programming. I know that there's more to come. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And there's so much more to come. This is just a glimpse into 50 years of our shared history in Vermont. We will continue to find, research, and bring back to broadcast many lost gems from the archives. And of course, we look forward to the coming years serving Vermonters and our neighbors together with the best of public media in our state. I hope that you enjoyed reminiscing with us today and celebrating a milestone in Vermont broadcast history, 50 years of Vermont PBS.